My name is Ronnie Chikite. I'm the elected chief of the Weewakai First Nation, and I would like to welcome everybody to the traditional territory of the Weewakai and Weewakums traditional territory. We're here today to talk about the importance of the Indigenous-led science and stewardship in our territorial waters, and how crucial our traditional knowledge is becoming to understanding the impacts of climate change, the state of wild salmon, and what's going on in the ocean environment. We appreciate the hard work that went into the document that's being launched today. However, going forward, our nations want to author and develop our own reports using our own science, oversight, and traditional knowledge of our territories. Using traditional ecological knowledge and Western science, we can have a more holistic understanding of what's going on in our marine spaces. And we can determine how best to use that knowledge to diversify our marine economies with minimal impacts to the environment and to the wild salmon, to benefit all of our communities. I'd like to thank the contributors for the hard work, the dedication, and time to review review with the First Nation communities. I'd like to thank the First Nations leaders who joined us up on stage today and traveling to our Liquido territory, and those who came here to support the launch of this. So I'd like to introduce Dallas Smith to come up to the podium. Thanks.
Hey, Gazla. It's a good day today. I stood at this exact podium 2 years and a week ago to talk about the need for our communities to come together to save this sector that our communities have grown to depend, thrive, and build upon over the last 10 to 12 years up and down the coast. I want to thank my brothers and sisters from up and down the coast who've journeyed from a far way to be here with us today. I joked to people when I was here 2 years ago, I had to invite a bunch of politicians to stand with me because our communities were so afraid to stand up and be in the limelight around this sector. But over the last 2 years, as we've collaborated with each other, as we've worked with the companies and the great people within the companies, we've realized that we're all just communities of the coast that are trying to find a way to make things better for our future generations. And a foundation like that, we can build anything upon. We're here today as rights holder First Nations with salmon farms in our territories to launch a 500-page document on BC salmon farming that we asked our partners to produce over a year ago. We've read the press, we understand the concerns that are out there, and I want to assure British Columbians and Canadians that we are on top of them. We have a plan going forward, and we almost apologize today for letting the activists mislead people in so many ways. They talk about an industry that existed in the late 80s and 90s, where we now are talking about a modern salmon farming sector that provides affordable, sustainable food security for not only our province, our country, but for people around the world. Last year, our leadership recognized during community meetings that there's some gaps in information in salmon farming and gaps that we asked the companies to fill that we've started to see being filled today. By commissioning this review, Modern Salmon Farming in British Columbia, we have created a solid start for First Nations with salmon farms to start owning and leading the science and research of farms in their territories. We have different geographical conditions up and down the coast. There's not a one size that fits all for how any of us approach industry or sector development within our territories. So it's taken this time for us to make independent transition plans. But at the same time, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans has been doing their transition plan. And so we want to use this salmon farming science review as a foundation going forward for a government to government process as we make sure that no one gets left behind as we transition from the old industry into the new sector that provides all those benefits around food security, human well-being, economic well-being, and social well-being to our communities. It also enables Indigenous leadership to make better and informed decisions for their communities, marine management plans, and economic diversification. As original stewards since time immemorial, now we can use our traditional ecological knowledge and integrate that with Western science and stewardship programs to create a holistic understanding of what is going on in our marine territories. We have a better understanding of the impacts of marine industries, climate change, and the state of Pacific salmon. We've evolved eNGOS, the Indigenous Center for Aquatic Health Science, to help us be that hub for this science going forward, to help that dialogue. And it's not only focused on this sector. This sector is an important foundation. It's a pillar to our path going forward around the blue economy. But it also has to be about the management and protection of wild salmon. And over the last 2 years, each of our nations have worked closely with our sector partners in our territories to not only talk about how we continue to sustainably integrate technology and evolution into our farming practices, we're also talking about what can we do together to protect and enhance wild salmon in our territories. We know the truths. We know that there are many stressors to wild salmon, from climate change to forest habitat to watershed management, and it's important that we all get on the same page if we're going to have a successful future that both protects wild salmon and continues to grow food security and opportunities for our people. It's also important to recognize that while some nations have been transitioning farms out of their territory, 100% of the farms remaining in British Columbia have support of the First Nations community that they're operating in. And this is why we are leading this transition of the sector in our territories, working with both the federal and provincial governments and the sector. And I think it's important to illustrate why we're working with the sector. I spent 20 years in the Great Bear Rainforest watching people argue about my territories, Chief Patty Walker's territories, Chief Harvey Robinson's territories, until we finally got engaged, and we engaged the forest companies and brought them towards the meaningful change that was necessary to bring sustainability back to other resource developments within our territories. And that's the same approach we're taking right now. We've challenged the industry to meet us, to raise the bar and make it better. And to their credit, they are not only willing, but they are able. But we need certainty. We need enough runway to be able to do the planning that we've done. We need the ability to bring in the economic certainty so we can bring the investment in to keep doing things better, to keep learning from what we've done, to see it done better in the future. What transition looks like for each nation will look different. Different territories, different capacities, but all united by the rights and title of self-determination. And that's a really important factor in this discussion. This is about the rights and title of the First Nations who have this sector within their territories. This isn't about what people in North Vancouver thinks. This isn't about what people in Hollywood thinks. This is a rights and title issue, and we are going to lead that rights and title discussion. We got to remember that these are remote areas. These are not areas where this kinds of livelihoods are just recreated overnight. We need to continue to work towards that transition about how we continue to do this in the future, because someone in Vancouver isn't going to have an understanding of what it means to have a family supporting job in Clem 2, in Guaslanaquada, in Colaguis, in the various territories that all of our nations come from. But we're a resilient coastal people. We're continuing to find our voices and grow into our leadership role that's been enhanced by the introduction of UNDRIP and DRIPA into both the federal and provincial government's vocabularies. We know that our traditional ecology, apologies. This is what happens when you don't have coffee in the morning. We are resilient coastal peoples finding our voices, and we've learned over other songs and dances that Western science is continually catching up to our traditional ecological knowledge. For 10,000 years, people were convinced the only way Indigenous people got into North America was through the land bridge in the Ice Age. Carbon dating has showed us that our people have been here for 14,000 years on the coast of British Columbia before the Ice Age. And so we're going to continue to lead by example, but integrate Western science with our traditional ecological knowledge. We will continue to both use our voices and our best decisions for our communities, and we won't be swayed by well-funded urban activists and outsiders with misinformed agendas. We are growing food in our territories for Canadian families. In the midst of a growing food security and affordability crisis, this is such an important issue. To feed our communities and to feed Canadians, we need government support and trust in our decision-making with salmon farming. We need sector investment to ensure our nations can continue to steward our traditional territories while advancing our economic opportunities. We can be stewards of wild salmon for our traditional food fish while farming salmon to feed the rest of the world. We can, and we're willing to continue to do both. Today's launch of this substantial document is just the beginning. Our nations are excited to show Canada, the world, and coastal First Nations are capable when given the trust, capacity, and resources to lead the way in marine science, stewardship, conservation, and the blue economy. We invite you all to walk this path with us. I want to put thanks for the team that put together this scientific textbook that we're starting to call it, of already transparent, accessible, peer-reviewed science and technology that's been out there. We need to start going to the source for the information about issues. And as First Nations communities committed to seeing this sector continue to thrive and develop in our territories, we're going to lead that way. I'd like to introduce Brian Kingsit and Mayor Dahl and the managing directors and Dr. Saya to come join our nations on the stage as we start to take this journey into the future. I was going to say stand up, Kermit, but I agreed I wasn't going to tease you today. I'm going to pay for that one.
I'll be much quicker than Dallas. I like to talk less than he does. First, I want to acknowledge that I'm honored to be invited to join you all today on the unceded traditional territories of the Wewakam and the Wewakai of the Aquatic First Nation. As the mayor of Campbell River, I'm grateful to be here this morning to support the launch of this monumental document, requested by coastal First Nations and driven by their goals of having a better understanding of how local marine resource industries interact with the environment, stewardship, and economies. The City of Campbell River has always been supportive of the rights, title, and self-determination of our local First Nations, and we strongly advocate for the rights of the First Nations to choose whether or not to have salmon farming in their territories. Today I stand with these nations from across the province to support their aspirations of economic and scientific autonomy, while also supporting the importance of salmon farming and the benefits of the sector to the North Island communities, businesses, and families. We're also proud to have such an incredible internationally accredited lab like BC CAHS right here in Campbell River. We're excited to see how a local First Nations, science, and resource sectors can work together in the future, particularly through the Indigenous Centre for Aquatic Health Sciences and Stewardship, or ICAHS. These are exciting times. Thank you very much for inviting me to stand with you today. I appreciate it. Thanks, Dallas.
Thank you, Dallas. My name is Brian Kingset. I'm proud to serve as the Executive Director of the BC Salmon Farming Association. And I'll just say with a quick note for anyone who ever has to follow Dallas with similar speaking notes, don't. because mine are mostly null and void now. So the BC Salmon Farmers Association, and thank you Chief Chikite and Dallas and guests from the coalition and Mayor Dahl and our producing managing directors. The BC salmon farming sector represents the producers of farmed salmon and sablefish and in British Columbia, as well as more than 65 critical industry specialist suppliers in the sector, largely located on northern Vancouver Island and in the Lower Mainland, but also across Canada. We are committed to producing sustainable farmed salmon and black cod in British Columbia, producing the equivalent of more than 38 million nutritious meals per year. We do that on public lands and unceded territories of the First Nations, most of which are represented here today, on a physical footprint that is actually less than the area of Stanley Park. But we have a great economic input to British Columbia. Right now, producing about $1.2 billion in economic activity, BC's largest agricultural export, and providing approximately 4,700 jobs, mostly located here on the North Island. We are very proud that about 700 of those jobs are identified as Indigenous, and we put more than $50 million into Indigenous communities through jobs and contracts and supplier contracts. Like most great things, this project that we're talking about here today started as a conversation. As many of you are aware, the farm salmon industry in British Columbia is relatively new. It has come at a time when wild salmon populations have been declining, and there's been much controversy over this new sector. And we operate in a public space, and we are highly, highly regulated. So the conversation that started over a year ago was, could we put together a summary of the science around the industry? Something that would help First Nations be able to review, make information available within their communities, and make better sound decisions. That conversation turned into quite a project. We thought we were going to start with a short summary. Most of the data about the sector is already available. But it's mostly behind paywalled scientific papers, in obscure federal websites with all the data that the sector supplies on all our operations, in controversial press releases, data sets, esoteric federal reports. And it's hard to digest and hard to do, and hard to analyze. So we took on the challenge and put together a team of both internal and external experts, and looked at things like what do we do with our, how are we regulated on incidental catch? How do we manage around sea lice? What are the issues around fish health and disease? What are the issues around our interactions with wildlife that coexist in where our farms are located? How do we ensure that feed and the production of salmon feed does not have negative effects on marine resources? How do we make sure that our salmon that we produce are healthy and nutritious to eat and have a very low carbon footprint, something we're very proud of? And we also delved into things like the socioeconomic activities that we have and the impacts that we have on the communities in which we operate. The coalition took responsibility for actually authoring a chapter on Indigenous stewardship and how we are moving towards, as Dallas discussed today, to recognizing UNDRIP, ensuring that all of our salmon farms are under agreement with the First Nations right holders in the territories that we operate. So we put all that together in one document. It turned, I'll admit, as the person who started this as the project manager, this got to be way more than we expected. It is now live on the BC Salmon Farmers website. We will be supplying hard copies and electronic copies, not just to the First Nations in the coalition, but we've been asked to provide them to other First Nations up and down the coast who may have questions about salmon farming and want to learn more. As Dallas said, we see this as a foundational brick in a large foundation and as simply a starting place. We will continue to evolve this document, and what we see is the transfer of science over to the First Nations, who are already using their guardian programs and their professional biologists to provide environmental stewardship over the sector. So again, while we're celebrating the production of this document, we really see it as the start, and we really look forward to moving forward with the coalition. And with that, to talk about where we're moving, I'll turn it over to Dr. Ahmad Saya, PhD in Oceanography and Managing Director of the Indigenous Center for Aquatic Health Sciences. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. My name is Ahmed Sia, and I have a PhD in oceanography from the University of Quebec at Rimouski, jointly with the University of McGill and the University of Laval. I'm currently the Managing Director of the BC Center for Aquatic Health Sciences, and first and foremost, I would like to acknowledge that the Center for Aquatic Health Sciences has been operating for almost 2 decades on the traditional territories of the Lake Quilchak speaking peoples and within the territories of Wiwakai and Wiwakam First Nations. The Center for Aquatic Health Sciences is a non-for-profit organization, a center that is dedicated to do research science and to monitor the environment. The lab is an accredited ISO 17025 laboratory by the Canadian Association for Laboratory Accreditation, and it does operate under stringent CFI certification and regulations as a level 2 facility. Today, the launch of the review of the Modern Salmon Farming British Columbia Review strongly aligns with the BC Centre for Aquatic Health Sciences values, goals, practices, and priorities. This is also an inspiring example for what happens when First Nations are given the leadership seat at the table of the Western science, mainly when it concerns their territories and their marine environments. This is how BC Centre for Aquatic Health Sciences is committed to our operations now and into the future. Looking forward, the Centre for Aquatic Health Sciences is committed to fostering an Indigenous-led scientific capability with a holistic understanding of aquatic ecosystem. This would be done through an internationally accredited, recognized science network and active community engagement. The Center for Aquatic Health Sciences aims to empower Indigenous communities' work by integrating the traditional knowledge with modern technologies and Western science methodologies. This will be done here in Camber River under the same location and space, which would be called the Indigenous Center for Aquatic Health Sciences and Stewardship, or ICAS. Practically speaking, ICAS will serve as a dynamic platform and a hub for meaningful dialogue and information exchange. Individuals, academics, national and international scientists, corporation, organization, guardians, and First Nations group will come together under one roof to share in an open and transparent scientific discussion about our aquatic ecosystem, like the state of the wild Pacific salmon and marine resources. By unifying Indigenous traditional knowledge and the Western science, we are provided with a more holistic understanding of what's going on in our oceans, mainly in the context of climate change. By working together, we can better predict and mitigate the impact, and we can improve our conservation efforts and revitalize the species at risk that are critical to our coastal communities. Together, let's aim for a more sustainable future, guided by trust and internationally recognized scientific methodologies, innovation, and most importantly, guided by the respect for the land where we live and work on, and the rich culture and knowledge of indigenous people. Thank you.
Let's all take a breath for a minute and just soak some of this in. This isn't a new direction that we're heading in. First Nations people have been stretching their legs and finding their voice. And as my good friend Robert Dennis, former chief of the Hooyat, who's a longtime advocate for First Nation self-determination, told me, we need to just start to drive the bus. And we're prepared to do that. And we've been honored that many people have joined us for that bus ride. And we're going to continue to advocate what's right for our territories as determined by our laws, as supported by science. It's as simple as that. We are going to stand up for what is right for our communities. We are going to stand up what is right for the opportunities for our future generations. And we're going to use tools like stewardship programs. Just like we manage forest resources, just like we manage other resources, just like we use our guardians to manage our protected areas, we're going to use our scientifically, traditionally trained guardians to continue to manage this sector just as we do every other sector in our territory. We're tired of the romanticism of this issue tearing our communities apart, and we're not going to stand for it anymore. We're going to continue to push back against the activists that are dividing our communities, and we're going to work with our fellow First Nations up and down the coast, up and down the river, and we're going to have nation-to-nation dialogues just as we did since time immemorial. We're going to take back the opportunities that people are trying to take away from us across the sector within our territories. And so we're so happy that you were all able to join us here today, because we have a plan going forward, and we're not going to stop working till the provincial and federal governments stand on this stage with us and talk about how the future is together. So on behalf of the nations of the Coalition of First Nations for Finfish Stewardship, I just realized that's FFS. Huh? I want to thank you all. I want to thank you all for your faith, your trust, your patience, but more importantly, your support for our self-determination. Gaelic Hasla.